Hello, everyone. Welcome to, this would be the first Secrets of Eventide stream. Hello, I am Jason Bullman. I'm the creator of Eventide and the Pathfinder role-playing game, and today we are going to be doing the first of a long-running series of streams, looking at some of the secrets behind the setting of Eventide, and kind of an investigation into kind of how things were made, what decisions were made, and how they were made. This series of streams will happen every other Saturday, starting today and going forward. These streams are really kind of designed to give you kind of an inside look at how the world was created. We're going to delve into some secrets and some lore that isn't readily available just yet. But the main goal of this is to give you kind of behind-the-screen look. And this stream, of course, is only available to Eventide Master and Lord levels. The Scholar level doesn't have access, and the Adventurers don't either. So this is kind of special. This is a chance for me to chat and talk to all of you. This stream will be a bit more conversational than the other stream. The other stream is more kind of like a news dump. This stream is really kind of here to kind of walk through some of my process and some of the ways that I'm going about building this setting. So I hope you're ready to tuck in and give this a watch. We will be going till just before 4 p.m. here, so I do want to dive right into it right away. There'll be plenty of time for questions at the end, but I do want to kind of start by launching into kind of the precept of what we're doing here today. So in coming streams, we're probably going to spend some time looking at the structure of the adventure and how that came together and where that's going. Not quite ready for that yet. We're still kind of doing some 10,000 foot stuff with my groups. I had my first session 0 this week. So we're still in kind of some early stage stuff there. That said, the adventure is coming along. It's just not ready for me to talk about yet. But one thing that is ready to talk about right now is something that I haven't really discussed at all with patrons, certainly not with my players, is the cosmology of the world of Eventide. Now, I haven't talked about it much because it's not really very player-facing, especially not at the start of the campaign. The cosmology of the world is not well known. Unlike other settings where, wizards sit around studying this sort of stuff, most of the planar cosmology has kind of become locked away from them. They can't really see it. They can't really explore it. So for them, it is a bit more of a mystery. And something they will eventually discover through kind of delving and adventuring and less, kind of finding old treatises on it and less about going there themselves, because a lot of the planar magic doesn't work very well anymore. And this is just one of many manifestations of the damage to the kind of weave of magic of the world. And as it turns out, all of this stuff is tied together. There is some links between the way that magic works and the way the planes work and the way the gods work and the way kind of some of the changes that are happening. All of it has some causal links to one another. The mystery of what's happening is buried somewhere in all of this. And although we're not going to be answering that question today, we will look at kind of the structure of the planes. So obviously, Eventide being its own setting means that I have to create my own kind of planar cosmology, right? There isn't an open planar cosmology to pull from. And frankly, I was actually really much more interested when it comes to Eventide about building a cosmology that speaks to the setting itself. But also is one that allows for a multitude of worlds for people to adventure in, and to bring things from other worlds to this world if they want, right? So I'm a big fan personally of kind of grand unified cosmological theory across RPG settings that speaks to, oh, you're playing in a different published setting, you're playing in Forgotten Realms, you're playing in Galarian, you're playing wherever, Greyhawk, and you want to bring stuff to this world. You can, in my theory of kind of grand cosmological unified theory. There might be some tricks to that, but we'll get to that. So the first thing I do when I like to sit down and build a cosmology, and to be clear, I've only done this a handful of times over the years, right? Building a cosmology is something you generally do for a world once, And then you play with it for several years, so it's not something you are doing constantly. It's not like designing a town, which I, will do a dozen times in a single campaign. This is something I maybe only do once in a campaign, maybe only once across multiple campaigns if I set multiple campaigns in this. So, cosmological construction is something that I don't think most GMs do on a regular basis, because it does require kind of a more than just a 10,000 foot view. It requires a planar cosmological view of everything you're trying to do. So, for me, that process is one that starts by identifying what my needs are, right? Just with building anything, right? This is a task that I often undertake whenever I'm trying to construct anything for any of my games, is kind of identifying what does it need to be? What does the end result of this need to be? Now, for this, some of this ties into the story of the world, but generally speaking, when you're building a cosmology, you're going to be trying to answer a number of key questions. One, how do the deities work? How do they fit into the cosmology, right? Are they a driver of it? Are they a passenger of it? Are they a force that creates the cosmology? How do they fit in? How do deities play in? Because, frankly, the planes are really there to kind of play with some of these key issues, and one of the most important ones is, how do deities fit into it? Okay. The next one, I think, generally speaking, that most cosmologies are trying to answer is, how do souls work? How do mortals transit the planes in their journey through life? Right? And, not necessarily consciously, especially not from their material plane's perspective, but how is their soul created? How does it end up in the material plane? What happens when it dies? What's the through line? What's the path that it takes? Because oftentimes the cosmology speaks directly to souls. And if not, then what is going on with there? Right? Are there souls? Is that a thing? Are they all contained within the realm? Is it just an instant reincarnation thing? The soul never leaves the material plane. That's an answer too. But that is an answer that speaks to the cosmology in another interesting way. So next up, I find that most cosmologies want to answer questions about magic, and they also want to answer questions about, like, elemental forces and certain aspects of the magic system, right? All of this could be tied into magic. If you want to know, how does the ethereal plane work? How does the astral plane work? Does this setting have those? What do they mean? How do the elemental planes work? Obviously, elementals are a thing. Elementals have to come from somewhere. Do they just live on the material plane? Is that the answer? And it can be the answer, right? I mean, so in some cases, you're either taking these elements and saying these live in the cosmology, and I'm building them a home, or their material plane, it's not actually a cosmological question. It's a material question, and that's where those things come from. I have certainly seen settings where there are no elemental planes. In fact, earth elementals just come from deep within the earth. Air elementals come from the loftiest parts of the sky. Water elementals come from the deepest part of the ocean, and fire elementals come from the hottest flames on them. Right? That's just where they live. Right? They are either causal or they are caused by. Right? So, that is a possibility. So what you're doing is you're taking all of these elements, and it's possible that there are more elements as well, right? And some of them could be a lot more mundane, right? You could decide that there are, empires or giant realms of people that move between the planes, and they are a thing you need to find a home. You could create a setting wherein there is a giant transitory river of people, or a city that moves from place to place through the cosmology, and as it does so, its location has different effects on the material plane. Like, that is a thing you could do, right? There's a city that crawls through the planes, and when it arrives in a place, that is what determines kind of the mood and shift of the material plane, and its movement may be random. Maybe it doesn't go on a path, right? These are all things you could add to your cosmological mix. You're basically kind of figuring out what ingredients you're putting in the cake, and then you're going to figure out how to bake it. So, for me, that's the big thing that I do first. So, when it comes to Eventide, obviously I have deities. I want to answer how they work with the cosmology. I have some strangeness going on with my magic, and that has to be factored in. Like, there should be some element of how the cosmology is put together that accepts that and understands that. How souls transit the planes is really important in Eventide. That is an important question. So I'm adding that to the mix. And how kind of various elements of magic overlap the world and how those all play together is also something that is very important. So one of the things that I'm really striving for with Eventide is to build a setting where all of these things feel like they are at home, especially when taken in the confines of the Pathfinder 2nd Edition rules engine. So, as someone who was there when the rules of magic were written, I have a good understanding of how those things work and how they came to be and what the kind of some of the reasons behind them were. But Galarian doesn't, as a world, wasn't built with those assumptions, right? It was built under different assumptions. That's not bad. It's just different. And when it came time for me to build a cosmology for Eventide, frankly, it was right around the middle of the design phase for Pathfinder 2nd Edition. And the questions about magic and things were already answered. So I had some of those tools to play with, and as it firmed up, I was able to kind of take that and say, how am I going to play specifically with this in the cosmology of the world? So, you kind of grab all your bits, what pieces you need to find answers for in your cosmology. And for me, the next thing is to look for a grand structure, right? You want something that is approachable, something that makes sense. I think there's a lot of ways various campaigns have approached this over the years. I think the most common way is kind of like an onion. There are layers, and the layers kind of go out from the material plane and in from the material plane. That's how you get your inner planes and your outer planes and all that. And there are transitory layers that get you between them and yada yada yada. It's like an onion. It has layers. And that is pretty common. I think that I've also seen cosmology setups that are more like orbits, that are like there are planes that come in and out of conjunction. I think there's a lot of these more in fiction than there are in RPGs, because frankly it's a lot harder to kind of understand orbital mechanics as part of your cosmology. But I think fiction does this a lot, where there are different realms, but they are in orbit, and sometimes they are close and sometimes they are far away. And frankly, it is usually just on the whims of the story and the needs of the story, right? Oh no, the plane of death is close. People will die very easily. Okay, great. That is an option. And then I also have seen ones where it's just like they're islands. They're just scattered around. They're just other places you can go visit. The cosmology for them is nothing that is scrutable to the viewer. And there's nothing wrong with that either, right? As a matter of fact, most of the other things can be viewed through that lens from someone who doesn't understand, right? So if you're playing in a world where there are onion layers and you have to go from the material plane to the, ethereal plane to get to the elemental planes, to you it's just island hopping. There's no sense of you transiting further in or further out, right? There's no sense of that. The only way that makes sense is that it does say this is next to this, is next to this, is next to this. So, that is one way of looking at it. Yes, onions have layers. That's right. Glad someone caught on to that. I was thinking the same thing. All right. So, there's other structures as well, right? I mean, I think you could do really interesting things where the planes are like a giant loop, and you cannot cross from one side of the loop to the other. You have to go from one to the other, and you're just traveling around bands on the loop. Like, that could be a very interesting cosmological setup, right? Where, where am I going? How am I getting there? I want to get to the heavens. Well, actually, you have to go through like 6 other realms to get there. So if someone's soul gets stolen and taken away to hell, it might be a significant journey. It's not just, we just plane shift from one to the other. The best you can do is hop to the next band, and then you have to find the key to move to the next one. It could be a kind of entire heroic journey. As a matter of fact, if you were building a a kind of Greek myth style, we need to go get someone who got lost on the plane style story, that'd be a really interesting setup. So once you've kind of got your needs and your structure, then it's just a matter of taking your needs and plugging them into the structure and figuring out how they all work together and how they live together. That sounds like an easy 3-step process, but it's actually very challenging, because you will hit points where your needs don't fit, or you have to rearrange things to make them work. So that's the process. There's a lot more to it, right? Because beyond that, you have to decide smaller things, like how do the planes work, and what's their... Do they have planar traits? Is that a thing? Is the plane of fire hot? Kill you just because you're there? It's so hot, right? You know, are there other planes that have weird, different rules that work differently, right? These are all decisions that you can make as part of your overall program. But I've gone through this already for Eventide. So instead of talking about hypotheticals at this point in time, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to shift over and actually talk about Eventide itself. So Eventide has 4 traditions of magic, just like Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Right? That is a core fundamental part of Pathfinder 2nd Edition. You have divine magic, primal magic, arcane magic, and occult magic. And these 4 traditions of magic kind of govern all spell casting in the world. If you are casting a spell, it's of one of those 4 traditions. Now, as everyone well knows by this point in time, primal magic is basically extinct in the world of Eventide. Honestly, it's not entirely true, but it's functionally true. Player characters can't be primal spellcasters. Gnomes are gone. Druids are a legend in the past. So, what happens is, you know, the magic makeup of this world is important. It's clearly a critical part of this setting. And when I started building the cosmology, one thing I wanted to make sure to do was to keep my planar cosmology approachable. I didn't want it so big and so overwhelming that it was kind of a thing you had to study to understand. And I immediately kind of latched on to having as few kind of planar bodies as possible. But I wanted them all to be tied directly to the material plane. So what I ended up with is a series of kind of planar abodes. These are homes in the planes. So I have 4 planar abodes. Each one is tied to one of the traditions of magic. And it is those planar abodes that give magic to the world. And they do this through 4 transitive planes that stretch out from them to engulf the world. So what you've got is you've got kind of the celestial realms. This is where the gods live. Not just good gods, not evil gods. Celestial isn't being used in the term of the game term celestial. It's being used in the term of the heavens, the sky above. Because remember, the deities in Eventide are all represented by constellations. That's very important. So they all dwell in the celestial realms. And that abode is vast. And it has all of your kind of planar homes that you would be interested in for deities. So it has a fiery hell. It has a clouded heaven. It has endless lush fields. It has, you know, that your eternal rewards all live in one planar abode. They're just in vastly different parts of it. And it's so vast that it may in fact be impossible to walk from one to the other. But they do all exist in the same place. And from that planar abode, the astral plane stretches out to engulf the material plane. So if you want to go to the celestial realms, you would leave the material plane behind. You would go through the astral plane, which is this kind of medium that transits the material plane in kind of a vast gray vapor that then has this bright light at the end of it that is the celestial realm. And as you get closer and closer, the stars resolve themselves and you are in the celestial realm where all of the gods live. Now, mind you, there's only 5 gods in Eventide, so it's kind of an emptier place than it once was. So that's that. On the opposite side of the material plane, you have the elemental thrones, and this is the elemental planes. This is the home of arcane magic. Now, elementalism isn't necessarily tied entirely to arcane magic, but in this world, the magic spheres travel in a direction and they come to a head. So while they may be shared, matter is shared between primal and arcane, because the flow of magic is clockwise. The primary elemental home is actually with the arcane. So the elemental throne is the home of arcane magic, and from it stretches the ethereal plane, which is a different kind of medium. It is matter that is coming into form. And as you get closer and closer to the material plane, it becomes more and more solid until it is, in fact, the solid form of the material plane. So, on one end, you've got, kind of the wispy nothingness of the realm beyond that leads to the celestial home. And on the other end, you've got kind of the solid matter that leads you to the elemental throne and the elemental. And there are great and powerful beings out there, but they are not deities. They are not worshipped as deities. They don't work as deities. But they are nonetheless incredibly powerful. So that's one axis. Then you've got the other axis. And in that axis, on one side, you have the Fey Court, which is the seat of primal magic. And it stretches out. It is all about positive energy and life. So it is the seat of life, and its verdant plane reaches out and stretches over the material plane. So it is from that life energy flows in to the material plane. So you've got that, right? And you're starting to see now that there is this pattern as it goes around. And on the opposite side, you have I think it's called the Keep of Shadows, which is the home of occult magic, and it is the home of the negative energy. So you've got this pole of energy flowing from the primal plane through the material plane into the occult plane, where it is being drained out. So it's like a siphon, right? The energy is going through. And it does through another transitive plane that overlaps called the shadow plane, right? So, and that's where negative energy is. So all of those 4 planes, that's it. There are 4 planar abodes and 4 transitive planes. So each transitive plane leads to one specific planar abode. There are some overlaps. The transitive planes kind of meld and mesh together on their borders in a way that allows you to kind of end up in one but transfer to another. There's some transit there that can happen. But on the whole, if you exit and go into the ethereal plane, you have 2 options. You're either going back to the material plane or you're going to the elemental abode, the elemental thrones. If you go into the astral plane, you're either going to the celestial realms or you're going back to the... Right? That's the way that works. You go out into the verdant plane and you end up in the Fey Court, or you go into the shadow plane and you end up, or the plane of shadows, and you end up at the Shadow Keep. Right? So that's kind of how this is all put together. Now, there's one last thing that needs to come together to make all of these things kind of sit, and that is the flow of souls. How does that all come together? So, this is where it gets really interesting. So, in the celestial realm, souls are forged. They're not entirely true. They're more like reforged, but I'll get to that. So souls are leave the celestial realm, and at this point in time, they are without thought or form or life. And as they transit clockwise around the celestial path, they transit into the primal plane, and the positive energy, where they are given life, where they are no longer souls, they are given life, but they are at this point in time without form. And they continue their journey, making their way to the elemental court, where they are given form, and they are born and become living things on the material plane. And in their time there, they accumulate experience and knowledge, and they become people with thoughts and ideas. And in essence, they gain mind. So they become conscious and sentient. So they first are just souls, then they become living souls, then they become living creatures, then they become fully formed, adult, rationing, sentient creatures, and then they finally make their final transit, which is them leaving the material plane behind. Life is pulled out of them, drained into the negative plane, and they are stripped of body and left with spirit. And only their spirit now, with all of their accumulated knowledge and wisdom, transits once again, leaving that place behind, arriving back in the celestial realm, where their knowledge is assimilated and incorporated into the celestial cosmos, stripped clean, and started over again. So it's a cycle, right? And it transits all four planes, and it does this. It's not so much that it's like zooming through the cosmos. It's this kind of transitive thing happens in tight orbit around the material plane, zooming in and out, pulling through it, and doing all those sorts of things. Now, to help visualize this, I actually have a diagram. So I'm going to bring that up, and hopefully that'll make it a little bit more clear to everybody. So here is our diagram. So as you can see up at the top, we have the celestial realm and its astral plane that reaches out and stretches over the material plane. The soul is forged. It then is joined to the body. Its mind is shaped. Its spirit is released. The process begins anew. And you can see the shared magical traditions float between these, right? So where they overlap, life is the domain of both the celestial realms and the Fey court, and that half is governed by life. As you continue around, right, life is given matter, and life is given mind. It is then stripped of life and becomes just spirit, and just continues its pattern around and around cycle. Sorry, folks, my stream destabilized there for just half a second. I think it's all good now, though. All right, so that is kind of how the planar cosmology plays out, right? So in this realm, souls have this pattern, this journey that they take. They travel between all of the various spheres of magic. It's why those spheres of magic have influence over living things, because at some point in time, that magic shapes all living things. So that's kind of the cosmological setup for Eventide. At least that's the standard pattern, but that isn't the way things currently are. Well, at least, things are not as easy as they seem, because obviously primal magic isn't working as well. Now, it's clearly still something is going on, because there are still living creatures in the world being born. So the river of souls is by no means being disturbed, but there's something in the process that is flawed. There's something in that great chain that is not working the way it's supposed to, because primal magic is not flowing into the world, or at least it's not being drawn. No one on the world actually knows whether or not it's just no one can access it or it's not there. There's not a clean answer there, because there's no one who's even really studying it. There was, at one point in time, someone trying to investigate this. There were a number of people trying to investigate this centuries ago, hundreds of years ago, but there aren't conclusive answers as to what is actually happening. So, this sort of diagram is something that I think is really important for a world to have an understanding, because it speaks to how all of the various kind of rules elements of the world play together, right? So this answers, where do my gods live? Well, they live in the celestial realm. Where do elementals come from? Well, they clearly come down from the elemental spheres. The Fey Court, you know, and its relation to the Shadowkeep and how those things play together. There's something going on there, right? There is a flow of life energy that is the natural way of things. That is kind of like, I view the positive and negative energy in a campaign setting as the charge created by the journey of souls, right? The journey of living things kind of creates this charge. It's almost kind of like how a motor works, right? You know, you apply charge to a thing and it spins. Well, in this case, it's spinning, which is creating charge, and that charge is that flow of life that kind of travels through things. I try not to apply alignment to this necessarily, because I think all of the different spheres can have different alignment aspects to them. And frankly, I'm trying to make alignment a little less important in Eventide. There is certainly some alignment ramifications between the energies of life and the energies of death, but they're not absolute, right? It's not like, oh, the shadow plane is evil. It is a place of decay and death where life leaves things, but that isn't necessarily evil. And just because the Fey realm is where life is infused in a thing doesn't make it good either. And the celestial realms are certainly a kind of a hodgepodge of the various alignments. The elemental spheres are neutral by and large. They're more concerned with magic, but that doesn't mean that there aren't evil elemental, you know, creatures living out there as well. So one other thing that this speaks to that I've mentioned in some of the other documents that we've put out is that summonings don't work very well anymore in Eventide. They're not readily available as player options because spellcasters centuries ago saw them as too dangerous and started locking away the spells and not teaching it to new students. So as a result, they became less and less common in the world. That doesn't mean you can't find them. It's just that they are dangerous to cast. And they are dangerous because there is a chance what you summon does not go home. It instead stays at the end of its spell. And when the spell ends, it's no longer controlled. And to top it off, it's probably pretty angry that it doesn't get to. So that is an element of this game that speaks to this cosmology as well, because these summoned creatures come from those planes, right? You are summoning things from outside this world and bringing them to the world of Eventide, and they don't get to go home. And that has something to do with the fact that the planar transit is not as easy as it once was. Still possible, but it is more difficult. And at some point in time, we will get to explore that a little bit deeper. But right now, I think I'm going to leave it a mystery. Because no one can cast those spells in any of my playtest games. So I don't need to tell you. No, I mean, basically, I'm looking forward to exploring that more deeply when we get to some higher level character options. As you may have noticed, this week up on the Minotaur Games website, there were some player options loaded up, but most of them are focused on lower level character options. And some of the ones I'm going to be loading up here in the coming days are going to be lower level options as well. I'm starting with the lower level options. It's a player's guide. There will be higher level options at some point in time, but right now I'm kind of focusing on the lower level options because all the characters that should be playing in this world are lower level. In fact, if you are hoping or thinking about running an Eventide campaign, I would recommend starting at low levels right now and not racing to the higher levels, because there's going to be secrets and things that I can't reveal until I'm ready to kind of talk about them. Some of them are still being written, some of them are being developed. Others are a little in flux until I see how some other design pieces kind of fall into place. So, you know, that is another element of this, is how that works, right? Obviously, there are still spells that allow you to, like, blink and teleport and things like that, but all of those have planar ramifications, so a lot of those don't work particularly well anymore. And I'll get more into that as we kind of get more into that part of the game when the characters level up some. So you gotta wait until my characters get some level. All right, so I think that just about covers everything I kind of wanted to reveal here. I do want to open it up to some questions and some general conversation. So if anybody has any questions or things that they want to ask, go right ahead and type those up. I'm gonna have myself a little bit of seltzer water here just to wet the whistle. All right. So, yeah, that's kind of what I'm playing with. Now, one thing that might be interesting to think about is, as these realms are also the home of magic, right? The celestial realm and the elemental spheres are in some way hampered. Their magic is some way hampered. The Fate Court is definitely not working properly. But the Plane of Shadows appears to be working just fine. So there are elements of the magic system that still function as normal. Normal being game system normal, but not all of them do. With the complexities of broken magic, this is Mr. Ty asking here, with the complexities of broken magic unbalanced due to missing parts, do you think the movement between planes will be difficult, random, or unplanned? I don't think they'll be unplanned, because the planar membrane, for lack of a better term, is stronger here. And as a result, it's becoming more and more difficult to travel between the planes. So I think there may be, if by unplanned you mean you end up somewhere that you didn't want to go when you do finally find a way to pierce that barrier, that's possible. But I don't think you'll just walk down a road and end up on a different plane, right? It's harder now. So, I'm not entirely sure how that's going to manifest. Spells like Plane Shift will still exist, but they may be higher level. They may require more magical juice to kind of get them to work. Because the planar barriers are firming up. Firming? They firming for now. They're becoming more difficult to transit. Now, obviously, they're still permeable to magic and things like that, because those things are still happening. But whether or not that continues to be the case is an open question. And in fact, that may have something to do with why primal magic isn't readily available. But that's not a fact. That's one of many suppositions. So, I got a question about, with primal magic being gone, are the prime fae almost all disappeared as well? Yes. The fae have not been heard of. In fact, so one thing that's going to be happening, it got cut out of the player's guide because it's not really player's knowledge, is shortly after the events of Eventide, the fae went berserk. Like, dryads cut down their own trees. Redcaps started killing each other. Things went bad for the fae pretty quickly. Like, in the span of 100 years, fae disappeared. They're just gone. They left with gnomes. It was around the same time. Gnomes weren't quite as bizarre when they left, but they left as So, I got a question about, do mortals know about souls? They do, because the deities, most of the faiths have taught them, at least a rudimentary understanding that souls, I mean, it's probably pretty, religious-centric, but that souls emanate from the celestial realm, spend time in the mortal world, learning, growing, experiencing, and then coming home to the celestial realms to, grow the knowledge of the gods, right? They probably know some version of that story. Do they know how the current works? Probably not. Do they do they understand the river a soul travels as it goes through. No, that's probably more than most of the lay people know. I'm going to wager that's probably buried in some religious texts, but it wouldn't be common knowledge. I have a question about the status of Drow in Eventide. So let me start with the Drow. I haven't said anything about the Drow. So, do Drow exist? Probably, but frankly, I need to think about it a little bit. Drow come with some tropes and stereotypes that I probably want to avoid and recast. I'm trying to make sure to be pretty diligent about all that kind of stuff, because frankly, there's a lot of fantasy tropes that have some pretty outdated origins and tropes baked into some of their assumptions that I need. Or I just say, yep, that's in. Second, if I already have an undead for using my Lord bonus, how best to discuss it? Oh, okay. So, that is an interesting question. This is something that, anyone at the Lord tier will get 100 words a month of my time. And what's going to happen is every month when it charges, I'm going to reach out to folks about that and credit your Word account, and then talk to you about whether or not you want to cash in or you want to wait till the next month. So, I'll be reaching out about it. Yeah, the river, it is, the river of souls is a thing in this world. But it's probably more metaphysical than an actual thing. Humans love to ascribe actual things to, an actual real thing to a metaphysical concept. So, there's a river of souls and there's a riverman and he takes coins to ferry you to the land of the dead. I'm sure that's a legend that exists in Eventide. Whether or not it's real or not is probably not. Right? Because the soul's journey, it's not like someone comes and walks you around the place. So, I have a question about, with Shadow being stronger and Shadow being where negative energy comes from, does that mean undead will be used more often in Eventide? It may. As of yet, that hasn't really been too manifest, but undead may be a stronger theme in this world. We haven't quite gotten there yet. There are some changes coming, but they aren't visible just... There are creatures of shadow that are certainly more powerful because of the tilt and the imbalance in magic right now. Yeah, occult and negative magic. Yeah, I mean there is a link there. There's something, but it's not as blatant. Because souls are still making their transits, right? They are still leaving the plane. So whatever's happening to the planar barrier, it isn't quite to the point where it is impacting souls, although it is possible that that is what has caused some of these other creatures to disappear. And, elven birth rate plummeted pretty significantly. There's, is that a sign that there is something wrong with the barrier as well that is changing? If so, it's happening very slowly. I can't give away any more than that. So, there are definitely things afoot. But whatever's happening, it's happening at such a slow pace that no one's really noticed yet, other than kind of some grander issue. So, yeah, there's that. Yeah, to be honest, this is one of my favorite parts of the setting. This is something that actually went through several drafts in the kind of early days, and frankly didn't really get firmed up till about a year ago, where I was playing around with some elements of it, and I just suddenly realized that everything kind of clicked. Now, one thing that I mentioned before is how magic travels. So it's worth bringing this back up, because... So magic travels in a clockwise fashion, right? So if you look at spirit, life, matter, and mind there towards the kind of middle of the diagram, Life is shared by both celestial realms and the Fey Court, but it comes to its conclusion almost like a comet traveling through the cosmos in the Fey Court. So the Fey Court is kind of engulfed with that sort of magic. Matter then follows next, and it is trailed and is part of the Fey realm as well. But it comes to a head in the elemental spheres. Mind, as a concept and magic, is shared by both arcane magic and occult magic, and it comes to a head in the plane of shadow, in the Shadow Keep, and that is their thing. And then spirit arcs out from it and comes to a head in the celestial realms. So each one of these, like, you could almost view them as comets traveling clockwise, and their planar abode is where they're at their most strongest. So elemental magic is the strongest in the arcane, but it is shared and has its roots and its origins in the primal plane. So all of those things are kind of tied together, right? It's the whole thing spins it's like a planar fidget spinner. That's a terrible analogy, but it is. How are spells that bring back the dead affected by the change to the cosmology? Or is that not much of a difference? Well, we haven't gotten to it yet, but those spells don't work quite as well. They have chances of failure. Because that planar boundary doesn't work. Magic piercing it seems to be a challenge. The forces of magic are what's having a harder time piercing that planar veil. Whereas its kind of natural permeability doesn't appear yet to be affected, or at least not affected severely. But there's something going on. There's something about the veil between worlds that is resisting magic, but is still allowing the natural transit. So souls can come in, souls can go out, but magic pulling things in is harder, and magic sending things out, like planar transit, is harder. Obviously, if you use a spell to kill somebody, their soul is now on its natural way. It's not like the spell is transit soul out of body. It's called Finger of Death. It's like, no, kill the body. All right, soul can go. What happens after that isn't the spell's concern. But yeah, there's definitely something afoot going on there. So, folks, I think that's about it. I have another stream that's going to start up here in just a minute. So I want to make sure I'm able to get ready for that. But folks, I want to thank you all for stopping by here today. The next one of these secret streams will be on the 2nd of April. And for that stream, we're actually going to look at the adventure. That is going to be our next stream, as we are going to look at the construction of Wolfram's Fate and kind of what's going on there and what I'm hoping to achieve, and kind of looking at it from a meta level. I will be doing streams, every Tuesday. That's for the broader audience. A lot of those are going to start looking at the groups and looking at the kind of setup of the specific adventures themselves. Whereas what we're going to be talking about is more kind of the broader meta questions about the adventures and kind of what it takes to build these. So, folks, that's what we got going on here. I want to thank you all for stopping by. For those of you who maybe didn't catch it live, these streams will be happening every other Saturday at 3 p.m. Pacific time. I invite you to join us. Of course, if you can't, these videos will always be available to patron supporters through the link over on Patreon. I want to thank you all for watching. For those of you sticking around for the next stream, we'll see you in just a few. Thanks for watching, everybody. We will see you next time.